He thought this would be just another interview, another opportunity to use his experience, unsettle his guest, and expose her in front of a national audience. After all, he had done it countless times before. His reputation wasn't built on politeness or fairness. It was built on dominance. He knew how to twist words, how to interrupt at just the right moment, how to make his guests stumble before they even realized what had happened. But this time, something was different. When Karoline Leavitt finished speaking, it wasn't her who struggled for words. It wasn't her who shifted uncomfortably in her seat. It was Richard Caldwell. The silence in the studio wasn't planned. It wasn't scripted. It was a silence of defeat. The moment she received the invitation, Karoline knew exactly what was coming. This wasn't just any news show. It was one of the most watched programs in the country, known for its brutal debates, aggressive interviews, and high-profile takedowns. Guests didn't come here to talk. They came to survive. And the host? Richard Caldwell, a veteran journalist with decades of experience. Caldwell had built a career on being ruthless, relentless, and unapologetic. His goal was never just to inform. It was to control. He dictated the pace of every conversation, setting traps and forcing his guests into corners where their only options were to fold under pressure or embarrass themselves trying to fight back. He had interviewed presidents, CEOs, and the most influential figures in the world, and almost always he came out on top. He knew how to win. And tonight, Karoline was his next target. Since rising to prominence, Karoline had become a constant target of the mainstream media. They called her inexperienced, naive, a pretty face with no real substance. And now, Caldwell wanted to be the one to prove it on live television. The strategy was clear. He would start with seemingly harmless questions, but they would be designed to trap her. He would use sarcasm and dismissiveness to belittle her and shake her confidence. He would do everything in his power to make her just another failed guest, another viral embarrassment. But there was one thing he didn't know. Karoline wasn't just expecting this. She was ready for it. This wasn't an ambush. This was a challenge. And by the end of the night, Richard Caldwell would learn that the hard way. From the moment Karoline Leavitt stepped into the building, she could feel it, the tension. It wasn't just the typical pre-show nerves that filled news studios before a big interview. This was different. It was a silent, unspoken expectation of failure. Every hallway, every glance, every interaction carried the same unspoken message. She won't last. She won't win. She won't make it out of this unscathed. She had been in studios before. She had faced tough questions. But tonight, she wasn't just here to answer questions. She was walking straight into a trap. She knew it, and so did everyone else. As she walked through the studio corridors, the atmosphere felt cold, detached, calculated. The producer greeted her with a forced smile, polite but insincere. His handshake was brief, his words rehearsed. The assistants barely looked at her. No small talk, no warm greetings. Just quick glances, whispered conversations, and subtle shifts in posture that spoke volumes. They had already decided the outcome before the cameras even started rolling. Nobody expected her to win this battle. As she was led down the hallway toward the dressing room, she caught glimpses of the newsroom staff. Some whispered as she passed. Others glanced at her, then quickly looked away. She could hear their thoughts without needing to listen. She's too young. She's out of her depth. Caldwell is going to tear her apart. It wasn't malicious. It was certainty. To them, Karoline wasn't a real contender. She was just another overconfident guest who had no idea what she was walking into. But they were wrong. Inside the dressing room, she took a seat in front of the mirror. The buzz of studio monitors filled the air, broadcasting the familiar, steady voice of Richard Caldwell. His tone was confident, measured, the voice of a man who had spent years controlling conversations, dictating the tempo of debates, and breaking down guests before they even realized what was happening. Karoline listened. She wasn't nervous. She was calculating. Every word, every pause, every subtle shift in his tone. She was studying him, just as he had undoubtedly studied her. She knew his type, the way he framed questions, the way he used sarcasm like a weapon, the way he created the illusion of fairness while setting up his guests to fail. He thought he had the upper hand. But Karoline was already 2 steps ahead. A knock at the door. An assistant peeked in. "We're ready for you." Karoline didn't respond right away. She took one last look in the mirror. Her reflection didn't show doubt. It showed determination. She exhaled slowly. This was it. She stood up, adjusted her blazer, and stepped toward the door. She wasn't just walking onto a stage. She was walking into a fight. And she was ready. The studio was colder than expected. Whether it was the air conditioning or just the sheer weight of the moment, it was hard to tell. Karoline walked in with confidence, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. But as she stepped further into the room, she could feel it, the weight of the eyes watching her, the silent expectation that she wouldn't last. The audience, journalists, analysts, and political commentators, sat in their seats, faces impassive but eyes sharp. Some leaned forward slightly, waiting for the clash, waiting for her to make the first mistake. At the center of it all, Richard Caldwell. He sat too comfortably, too at ease, one leg crossed over the other, fingers resting lightly on a stack of notes. His suit was pristine, his tie perfectly knotted, a man who had done this 1,000 times before. But it wasn't his posture that stood out. It was his eyes. Cold, analytical, watching her closely, measuring, calculating. Karoline took her seat. She didn't fidget. She didn't break eye contact. She didn't look at the cameras, the audience, or the producer giving last-minute instructions. Her focus was on him. Caldwell smiled, but not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smirk that dripped with quiet arrogance, the kind that said, "I've already won." He adjusted his tie, a deliberate move. Then he leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal dominance. His fingers brushed over his notes, but Karoline knew he wasn't reading from them. He had already planned his first attack. And then it began. "Caldwell, you made quite a name for yourself in a very short time. Some might say a little too fast for someone with so little experience." The words were smooth, casual, but they carried weight. A carefully crafted first strike. A subtle way of framing the narrative before she even had a chance to speak. A way of telling the audience, she doesn't belong here. The room held its breath. The tension thickened. Karoline didn't blink. She had been expecting this. She had rehearsed for this. And she refused to let him define her before she even had the chance to respond. Her posture remained relaxed. Her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, controlled. "Karoline, experience comes from action, not just time." A simple, direct counter. But it did something important. It shut down his attempt to paint her as unqualified. Caldwell's smirk didn't falter. Not yet, but he raised an eyebrow, a subtle sign that he had registered the hit. He adjusted his position slightly, shifting his weight in his chair. He wasn't thrown off, but he had expected an easier target. And so he pressed forward. "Caldwell, ha! But isn't that what all young people say before they realize they're playing a game far bigger than they ever imagined?" A few soft chuckles rippled through the audience. A psychological move. The message? She's just another overconfident rookie. A way of subtly belittling her, making her seem naive, out of her depth. Karoline didn't react. She didn't frown. She didn't scoff. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, not in hesitation, in study, as if she were analyzing him the same way he had analyzed her. And then she delivered her response. "Karoline, and isn't it funny how people in power always say that, right before they realize their time is up?" A shift, subtle, but undeniable. A murmur spread through the crowd. A few heads turned. A flicker of reaction. A tiny crack in Caldwell's composed exterior. For the first time in the interview, his smirk faltered. It was slight, barely noticeable to most. But Karoline saw it. She felt it. The first real sign that Caldwell was not in complete control. And that was all she needed. Because now the game had just changed. Caldwell hadn't lost control. Yet. But something was different. His confidence was still there. His tone still carried that air of authority. But beneath it, there was a shift. A subtle but undeniable shift. His first attacks had landed. He had set the traps. He had pushed the usual buttons. But Karoline, she hadn't flinched. She didn't stumble over her words. She didn't hesitate. She didn't fumble for an answer like so many others had before her. And that was unsettling him. So he did what people do when they feel their grip loosening. He pushed harder. He adjusted his posture, squared his shoulders, and went in for what he thought would be the decisive blow. Caldwell, let's be honest here. Do you really believe you deserve to be sitting in this chair? Or is this just another case of someone trying to skip the hard work and go straight to the spotlight? A classic tactic, a carefully veiled insult, hidden behind a seemingly innocent question. Make her question herself. Make the audience doubt her credibility. Make her second-guess everything she had worked for. It worked on most people. Most guests would scramble to prove themselves. They would try to justify their place in that chair, listing their achievements, their credentials, their hard-earned experience. But Karoline was not most people. She didn't rush to defend herself. She didn't shrink back or fill the silence with nervous words. Instead, she leaned forward slightly. Her expression? Unreadable, controlled, confident. She took a brief pause, just long enough to make Caldwell and the audience feel the weight of what was coming. And then she fired back. Karoline, success doesn't follow a fixed timeline. If someone is competent, driven, and prepared, why should they wait? The room shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. A few nods from the audience. Some people crossing their arms, considering her words. Others glancing at Caldwell, wondering how he would respond. People were thinking, and Caldwell felt it. So he changed his approach. If he couldn't make her feel out of place, he would undermine her legitimacy. Caldwell, but don't you think credibility matters? These days, anyone can build an audience without real knowledge or experience. It was calculated, sharp, precise. A single sentence that carried layers of meaning. He wasn't just questioning her experience. He was questioning her entire presence, implying she wasn't legitimate, that her success was manufactured, hollow, that she was just another influencer, another social media personality pretending to be something she wasn't. A weaker opponent might have taken the bait, might have gone down the path of listing credentials, defending their record, proving their worth. But Karoline, she knew better. She knew exactly what he was trying to do, and instead of playing defense, she went on the attack. Her voice remained calm, measured, but this time, there was something else behind it, something pointed. Karoline, funny how people in power always bring that up, right after someone younger outperforms them. The reaction was immediate, not just from Caldwell, from the entire room. A soft chuckle from someone in the back. A few raised eyebrows from the journalists seated nearby. A few sideways glances exchanged between the producers. It was subtle, but it was real. And Caldwell, for the first time, he felt it. The balance of power had shifted. He wasn't the one in control anymore, and he knew it. Caldwell was losing his grip. It wasn't obvious, not yet, but his posture had changed. His once relaxed demeanor was tightening. His smiles weren't as sharp. His words weren't landing as easily. And Karoline, she was in complete control. She wasn't just answering his questions. She was dismantling them. So Caldwell did what people do when they start losing. He got desperate. Caldwell, some people say you manipulate facts to fit your narrative. Would you say that's a fair criticism? It was an old trick, not an argument, just an accusation, designed to put her on the defensive, to make her react emotionally, to make her lose control. But Karoline, she didn't flinch. Karoline, when people don't have strong arguments against what I say, they attack the messenger. It's a classic distraction tactic. The audience stirred. A few knowing glances were exchanged. Caldwell's jaw tightened just slightly. And then he tried one last move, a final attempt to regain control. Caldwell, have you ever admitted you were wrong? A trap. Say no, and she's arrogant. Say yes, and she's unreliable. A no-win scenario for most people. But Karoline, she turned it into her advantage. Karoline, of course. But the difference is, when I realize I'm wrong, I don't double down to save my reputation. I correct it and move forward. Silence, not just from Caldwell, from the entire room. Caldwell exhaled, slowly. For the first time, he had no comeback. And Karoline? She knew it. So when Caldwell leaned back, gathering his notes, she went for knockout. Caldwell, do you really think you deserve to be here? A last-ditch effort. And Karoline? She smiled, not nervously, not hesitantly, but with absolute confidence. Karoline, respect isn't given, Richard. It's earned. The room shifted. The tension snapped. And for the first time all night, Caldwell was completely silent. The cameras were still rolling. The lights were still bright. But the energy in the room had completely changed. Richard Caldwell, the man who had dominated countless interviews, who had built a career out of tearing people down, was now sitting in absolute silence. He shifted his notes, cleared his throat, but there was nothing left to say. So he forced a smile. Caldwell, well, I think we can leave it at that. Karoline Leavitt, thank you for your time. It was over, but everyone in that room knew the truth. This wasn't an interview. It was a reckoning. And Caldwell had lost. The second the broadcast cut to commercial, the tension that held the studio hostage finally snapped. Some producers whispered among themselves, eyes wide. Others quickly looked away, pretending not to notice what had just happened. The sound technicians removed their headsets slower than usual, as if hesitant to move at all. Then, one of the junior producers, someone who had been watching from the side, arms crossed, broke the silence. Producer. That was something else. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply stood up, adjusted her blazer, and walked off the stage. She wasn't the type to rub it in. She didn't need to, because outside the studio, the real battle was already beginning. Her phone was vibrating nonstop. The clips were already spreading. On social media, people weren't just talking about what she had said. They were talking about how she said it. The confidence, the control, the way she had flipped the script on one of the most dominant interviewers in the industry. And the message was clear. There will always be people who try to question you, not because you're wrong, but because you're different. And when that happens, stand your ground, stay firm, and never apologize for being exactly where you deserve to be.